Hello and welcome back to Cicada Reads. This is my reading diary for February and March. Quick update, I didn't do a video last month because I basically spent most of February pretty sick, so it meant that A, I didn't really want to record a video after feeling better, and B, I didn't really read a lot in February. I was that kind of cold sicky where I couldn't really focus on reading. Didn't manage to read a few books, but I read way more in March, so I decided to just do them all together in one big video. So we've got 9 books to cover today. This is just the few that I still have left on my shelf that I haven't given to other people. So the first book I read in March was A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ghríofa. This is a book I've had on my shelf for a long time. I've always wanted to read it. A lot of people that I really respect really love this book. It's a kind of biography slash historical book. It's non-fiction, although it often reads like fiction. It's really, really well written. It's really, kind of evocative. And yeah, it basically follows Doireann Ghríofa, the author, as she's kind of doing this dual narrative between her experience as a mother and what it's like to be a mother. And the opening of the book is, this is a female text. It's very focused on the kind of female experience. And the other half is kind of a historical look back on the life of Ephron ní Dubh, who was an Irish poet who wrote this Keane, which is essentially like a grief poem for her husband, Artie Leary, after his death. So it kind of talks about her obsession with this poem and how, despite it being one of the most famous and most important poems in Irish history, not a lot is really known about Ephron after she died, or really her life outside of Artie Leary. So you can see how that ties into the ideas that we have about, women not being given the respect or acknowledgement that they deserve in history. A lot of times they're kind of just papered over, or she has this beautiful section where she talks about how things are written, in invisible ink. You have these stories that are so important, people who gave birth, for example, to famous figures, but they don't seem to get any sort of acknowledgement, or they don't seem to be remembered in the same way that their children end up becoming. It's a really beautiful book. It's really poetic. If you're not somebody who's into nonfiction, I think you should definitely give this book a shot. It's not stuffy or boring, or, it's not entirely history. She does a really good job of jumping back and forth between the two modes. You never feel like, or at least I never felt like I was missing something when she would jump back to the Ephron sections. She does go back and forth like that, and it's really well done. She's a beautiful writer. The reason I decided to read this now is because she has a new book called Said the Dead, which comes out in May, which I'm very excited for, because I think she's such a unique writer. She's, won awards. She deserves them incredibly. So yeah, I think I give this a 4.5 on Storygraph, and if you want to read some more in-depth thoughts, as always, the link is in the description to all my reviews. So the second books I read in February, which were the only other books I read in February, were a duology of books by Ali Smith. This is Glyph and Glyph. I heard about these books initially because I knew Glyph had come out, and I saw some articles talking about how she was releasing a second book with the exact same title, spelled slightly differently, and I thought, that's the kind of stupid, kind of pretentious stuff that I really like. So I decided to give them a try. Ali Smith is a Scottish writer. I haven't read any of her books before this, and I call it a duology. She kind of markets them as family. They're not sequels to each other, like Glyph with a Y doesn't follow on from Glyph with an I, but they are thematically kind of sequels. And they both deal with the same ideas of kind of surveillance states and the rise of fascism, and World War II and World War I kind of come up a lot in the second one, but ultimately at their core, they're kind of family stories. Both follow a pair of siblings, both are going through times that are not the best, let's just say. Whereas the main difference is that Glyph with an I is a sci-fi kind of dystopian novel, and Glyph with a Y is very much set in our current time. There's no sci-fi element to the sequel. I think the best way to sum them up is there's a scene in the second book, in Glyph with a Y, where one of the characters, Petra, has sent her sister a copy of a book to read because they've been out of touch for a while, and she was like, oh, I sent you this book, see what you think of it. And she kind of breaks it down saying that, oh, I thought it was okay, but I don't know, it felt a little bit too political. Like, what was going on? Like, they never actually revealed what happens in the end. Like, I wanted to know what happens to the family, and did they ever get home, and did they ever reconnect and stuff. And it's revealed, not bluntly, but, well, pretty bluntly, but just not directly, that the book that they're reading is Glyph with an I, Ali Smith's first book in the duology. So in this scene, the character of the book is kind of offering criticism to her previous book by saying that it's overly political, and I prefer a book to be, you know, entertainment, not kind of preachy, which is a very ballsy thing to do, to put, you know, frequent criticism to your book into your own book. And that's the kind of, it's not postmodern, but that kind of meta kind of humor that I like a lot. But yeah, the first book is a dystopian. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. It's very short. They're both very short, to a fault, I think. I'm, again, not overly familiar with her work, but I believe Ali Smith writes quite short books. They're very pacey and funny. She does have a really good way of writing humor, and she loves wordplay and puns. And also, it's not one of those literary books that's overly verbose. There's a lot of words you wouldn't hear every day, but the actual dialogue and stuff is written very casually. She also eschews any sort of punctuation, so if that kind of literary fiction drives you crazy, maybe stay away from here. Personally, I don't mind a lack of punctuation now. I think it's something that you get used to. Especially if you're reading modern literary fiction, it tends to be kind of a signifier of someone who either is a great writer or someone who thinks that it's how you make yourself look like a great writer. I've read a lot of bad books that don't use any punctuation, and I think they're kind of posturing. You know, it's that whole thing of you can break the rules once you know the rules, or once you perfected the rules. But yeah, the first one's a dystopian, it's pretty good. The second one is much more grounded, it's much more simple. It's these two sisters who have disconnected from when they were kids, and one of them gets essentially haunted by this ghost that they invented when they were children. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. That was actually what first drew me to it. When I read the back of the second one, I thought, oh, okay, now's my time to finally read these books. And yeah, they're good. I think the second one has a lot more interesting stuff to say about our current time and, you know, how we turn on the news every day and there's, you know, a new atrocity happening across the world. I mean, this book was written before the current happenings, you know, so this is very much focusing on Palestine and Gaza, and again, she's a UK writer, so you've got all the stuff about Palestinian Action being considered a terrorist group, which is now over. Good. It's a very current, it's a very modern book. I enjoyed it. I think if you're into that kind of thing, you will get something out of it. If you don't like overly literary books, I would still try it. I would try the first one, mainly because it's again more sci-fi, more kind of interesting. But the actual writing, the moment-to-moment writing, isn't overly literary. At least I don't think, anyway. So that wraps up my February. Again, like, both of these books are very thin. They're both 200 or less pages. And Ghost in the Throat, I started reading before I got sick, and only finished it afterwards. So, again, that gives you an idea of what I was doing in February. So, if February was quite a light month for me, March, I think, kind of exemplifies the range of books that I try to read. So, at the start of March, we got our third Uketsu book. This is Strange Buildings. Immediately read it. I have a history with Uketsu that I might get into in a different video, so I don't think I'm going to talk about this one too much. If you want to see some thoughts on it more in depth, you can read the review in the description. But I do plan on doing a video on not just Strange Buildings, but Uketsu as an author, as a thing. If you don't know, he's a mysterious Japanese YouTuber who dresses like this. I'll show you a photo here. And his novels tend to be kind of more like puzzle boxes than traditional novels. If I had to give you an example, you know, for example, Strange Buildings and Strange Houses are based on floor plans. So as you can see here, you've got, you know, little diagrams. Each chapter is based on a different house, and you will get little, like, you know, you kind of have to solve along the mystery yourself. Now, the narrator will eventually figure out the mystery and tell you like a traditional novel, but the fun for these books comes from seeing if you can figure it out before the book tells you, like a normal mystery novel. I enjoyed Strange Buildings, for a very brief thing. I liked Strange Houses a lot, and I really did not like Strange Pictures. These books have come out over the course of a year. I think they've been coming out for the last 5 years in Japan, and they're only really translating them now. Pushkin Press are doing them. And I think Strange Pictures was last, like, early 2025. Strange Houses was, like, mid-2025. And now Strange Buildings came out March this year. And there's one more, Strange Maps, which I think is going to come out this year as well. Or maybe early next year. Point is, they've been pushing these books like crazy. And I hated Strange Pictures when it came out. I really didn't enjoy it. I thought it was gimmicky. I thought the story was really weak. And I thought it kind of just was trying to market itself on something that it really wasn't. But I'll get into that in another video. The point is, I much preferred Strange Buildings, or Strange Houses. And Strange Buildings is very much a repeat of Strange Houses. It is the same kind of concept, it's the same character, and it's good. I think the mystery is weaker in this one than Strange Houses. It has that mystery issue of it goes a little too wide for my liking. I think Strange Houses kept it condensed, but in this one you've got these 11 chapters, and each chapter has a different house, and it spreads all around Japan to make this like huge mystery that's, again, at times interesting. I think there's aspects of it I really like, and there's other aspects where I'm like, bit far-fetched. But yeah, I'm going to talk about it more in a future video, but do keep an eye on Uketsu. If you're somebody who likes weird fiction, they're not weird fiction, and they're certainly not like House of Leaves, but they do a lot of interesting things with the medium, and if you're interested in that kind of thing, give them a try. Especially if you're into Japanese visual novels, so like Danganronpa or, Ace Attorney, like those kind of mystery puzzle games. I think those kind of people, if you're trying to get into books, this is a good way to transition. So we move on from modern, weird Japanese fiction to pretentious Irish classical literature. This is More Pricks Than Kicks by Samuel Beckett. This is what I mean by my kind of reading style is kind of encapsulated this month. I read Uketsu because A, it was new, and B, because I wanted something kind of easy to read. And after reading it, I was like, okay, I know I said easy, but not too easy. And I've had this on my shelf for a while. I got into Beckett for the first time properly last year by reading his trilogy, Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. And then I also read Murphy, which is his first kind of novel, his first full novel. More Pricks Than Kicks is his first published work. So it's essentially a collection of short stories with a connecting character of Balakwa. He's a very Beckett protagonist. He's kind of wandering through life, doing whatever he wants. He's kind of selfish. He doesn't really know what he wants to do. He often just kind of wanders around getting drunk, and he runs into all these different women in his life, and every chapter is kind of a different snapshot of his life with a different female focus. I guess that's the conceit of the book. It's not the best Beckett by a long shot, but it does kind of show that every good writer starts somewhere. And I think for someone like Beckett, who is considered one of the greatest authors of all time, I love his trilogy. Of course, Waiting for Godot, like, he's an influential, important author. But when you read More Pricks Than Kicks, you can really see his, like, juvenile side showing. It's very show-offy. Like, the language is really, like, over the top at times. There are sentences where you're like, I don't actually see what this adds to the story. I think you are just trying to show off how many languages you speak, which, he did. He was a very intelligent man. He spoke a lot of languages, but this was his first published work. It was published before World War II, and even he, in his letters later, like when they wanted to reissue it, he basically said he didn't want it republished, but, people wanted it anyway. Some of it comes from his first unpublished work, which is From Fair to Middling Women, which is, again, early Beckett. Not that late Beckett is much better with female characters, but early Beckett is very, like, male-focused. But yeah, Balakwa is an interesting character. There are fun chapters in it, but you can really tell that he was trying to be Joyce. He was trying to do his own Dubliners. It's set in Dublin for the most part. It follows a ragtag group, and you've got all of these like critiques on the learned man and general caricatures of people in Dublin. And yeah, it's got some good parts. I wouldn't say I loved reading it as much as I did, say, his other books. But I do think if you're someone who is interested in seeing how an author develops, I think you'd be silly not to read Beckett, and you'd also be silly not to read as much Beckett as you can. I personally love doing an author's work from beginning to end. I like starting where they first started and going all the way up to their most, up-to-date stuff. I think you get a really good idea of, again, how an author develops. I kind of read his trilogy without ever intending to read more. I was just like, well, I've always heard that Beckett is great. I should probably give him a good shot. And I love them so much that I decided then to go back. Fun book. More fun as a curio or as a kind of cultural piece rather than as a book by itself. But I will say, if you haven't read any Beckett before, I will be a pretentious guy and say you should read Beckett. I think everybody should. He's a hard author to get into sometimes, and again, if you don't like that stripped down literary style, maybe the trilogy might annoy you a bit, but I think if you can get past that and see it for what they are, Beckett's work is absolutely incredible. Well, I don't need to tell you Beckett's incredible. You know Beckett's move on. Continuing my trend of A, duologies in this video, and B, jumping all over the literary canon. This month I read 2 Shirley Jackson books, but not Shirley Jackson novels. I read A Life Among the Savages and Raising Demons, which are both Shirley Jackson's, I guess, domestic biographies? ? If you don't know Shirley Jackson, I've talked about her in other videos, but she was an American author who most famously wrote Haunting of Hill House, and We've Always Lived in the Castle, Hangs a Man, The Sundial, bunch of short stories, The Lottery she's probably most famous for. And she also wrote a lot of magazine pieces to do with, again, domestic life, and these were collected and published. I actually read them in reverse order. They're meant to be read in A Life Among the Savages first, and Raising Demons second. I read them backwards because I owned a copy of Raising Demons and had no idea that there was another one. These books are incredible. They're so funny. I will go on a rant about Shirley Jackson someday and how I think she's one of the most underappreciated writers of all time. She had such a way with words, and she was so good at writing things that are creepy and unnerving, but also some things that are just really, really, really funny. She was incredibly witty. Both books follow her family. She's never named in the book, and neither is her husband, Stanley Edgar Himes, but her 4 children are. So you've got, at the oldest, Laurie, then Joanne, then Sally, then Barry. Life Among the Savages starts when her 3rd child, Sally, is born, who is the best one, which is why I think Raising Demons is a slightly better book, because Sally is incredibly funny. And Raising Demons starts after they've kind of moved out of their first house and when Barry is born. So you've got this it's maybe like a 7 or 8 year time scale. And from looking at kind of dates, I think this would have been around the 1940s into the 1950s. So you would have been talking about, or before she published and after she published The Lottery and The Road Through the Wall and some of her really early stuff. Which is funny because nowhere in the books does she ever mention being a writer. There's one scene where she mentions being a writer, and they talk about how they have books all over the house, but her writing is never comes into it. It's more about the mania of looking after this many children, having an incredibly inept husband who sucks. Not to get too much into her real life story, her husband was a complete bastard, and it's reflected in the book. She just has a really nice way of talking about children and how she doesn't really romanticize motherhood at any point. She spends a lot of time showing you a side of her that you would think an author like this wouldn't show. You think that they would want to be perfect demure 1950s housewife or something. But no, Shirley Jackson was very much I am a woman who has to deal with the horrors of everyday life and trying to keep my rabid children from killing each other a lot of the time. There's a really funny section in Life Among the Savages where her son comes home with 2 friends talking about how this other kid had bullied them and essentially beat him up. And they call the parent and demand that he apologizes and da-da-da-da. And then that child tells his parent that, no, Laurie started the fight, and Laurie was throwing rocks at them. So everybody's obviously getting very defensive, and then she runs into that same mother the next day at the butcher's, and they're like, oh, like, how's your son? Is your son okay? And she's like, yeah, he's fine. How's Laurie? And she's like, yeah, he's fine. And then she pauses, and she says, like, absolute beasts, the lot of them. And they both bond over this moment of like, yeah, I didn't believe my son for a second. Obviously, he was lying. And again, that's the kind of tone that carries through the whole books. Like, she loves her children, clearly, but she also knows that they're not, you know, sunshines and rainbows, and they're not just perfect little angels all the time, which is very funny. Again, I can't recommend every Shirley Jackson enough. I love her work so much, and these were a real surprise to me, because I thought they would be interesting as a curio, like a little like fun insight into her life, and to be honest, you don't really get any of that. Like, again, she's unnamed for most of the novel. She just refers to herself as mother and her husband as husband. So don't go reading this if you want a biography of the life of Shirley Jackson. I would imagine that a lot of these stories are at the very least embellished. I think they're all probably true, but there's a certain level of like, well, that probably didn't happen that way. And Sally, in particular, the best child, is incredibly witty in ways where you're like, yeah, I could believe a child said this, but I also believe that maybe you've spruced it up a little bit. So yeah, read them in order or out of order, it really doesn't matter. Raising Demons, again, I think is slightly better. I think there's better anecdotes in it, but I mean, they're both amazing. She's incredible. Read all of Shirley Jackson's stuff. Tying into Shirley Jackson, talking about motherhood and things like that, I also read Heartburn by Nora Ephron. If you don't know Nora Ephron, she wrote When Harry Met Sally. She was a screenwriter. She also wrote a couple of books, mainly nonfiction. And this book is her only fiction novel, I think. Although most people would argue putting fiction there is, you know, it's fiction. It's more like auto-fiction than just a regular fiction novel. And she actually talks about that in the introduction to the version that I read. She talks about how for years people kind of have criticized her for basically taking what was a messy divorce and turning it into a book, and she basically is like, too bad. And I agree. I think it's well within her right to do this, although I also understand people in her life being like, hey, why the hell did you write a book about me? But also, I think if you leave your wife when she's 7 months pregnant to be with another woman, I think you probably deserve to have a book written about you. So yeah, that's basically the plot of the book. I can't really remember the character names, so I'm just gonna call her Nora. I'm sorry, but she's Nora Ephron if she was a food journalist who wrote cookbooks. That's the major difference between her and her protagonist. Essentially, it's the story of Nora Ephron. She was 7 months pregnant, finds out that her husband is cheating on her with this incredibly thin, tall woman, and how she deals with that. She goes from leaving him to, do I, go back to him? What do we do with the kids that they already have? What do they do with the custody? Meanwhile, she, again, is writing it in the most hilarious way possible. Nora Ephron is an incredibly funny writer. She's very kind of blunt and matter-of-fact. I think the book is set in the 80s. It's either late 70s or early 80s, one of them. And it's got that kind of, like, Jewish New York kind of comedy about it. So if you're into, that kind of thing. Again, if you like When Harry Met Sally, if you think When Harry Met Sally is funny, you'll probably like Heartburn. It does have a very cynical look on relationships, which I don't think I agree with, but I understand. In the moment of writing this novel, like, this was probably a very cathartic experience for Ephron, but I think her assessments on relationships and how essentially every man is going to cheat is obviously ridiculous. But again, I can also understand from her perspective why she would write a story like this. I don't really have much else to say about it that I haven't said in my review. It's incredibly entertaining. It's really short. I read this in pretty much an afternoon, and I enjoyed it a lot. It's very good. It's very fun. Again, ties into the theme of this video, apparently, which is women writing about motherhood in very different ways. You've got A Ghost in the Throat, which is very kind of erudite, and she doesn't mince words, like she doesn't dramatize motherhood, but she does talk about it in a very poetic kind of sense. And then you've got Shirley Jackson talking about how her children are little demons that will, get what they want if they can. And then you've got Nora Ephron talking about the kind of more pregnancy side and dealing with a husband who's just a wandering creep. Finally, to finish my sweeping broad range of books this month, I read I guess I can't really call it a video game adaptation, but a novel set in the Cyberpunk 2077 world, specifically the 2077 world, not the original tabletop game. This is No Coincidences. I find it hard to judge this book because I went into it knowing that it's not exactly going to be an incredible piece of literature. It's not, video game novels aren't known for being incredible. But I really love Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of my favorite games that I played in the last few years. Night City as a setting, I love so much. I think it's an incredible world and there's so much interesting stuff you can do with it. And for what it's worth, I think this book does do a lot of interesting things with the lore of the world of Night City. However, if I had to judge it based on just being a novel, it is utterly incomprehensible if you do not know Night City. Like, if you don't know what a chum is, or scop, or whether something is preem, you will not have any idea what's going on in this novel. They don't introduce any of the gangs, they just assume that you know who Maelstrom are, that you know what a Ripper is, that you know what a Fixer is. All of these things that are basic knowledge to fans of the world of Cyberpunk, but that are not typical sci-fi things, like it's not like you're saying starship or something where it's like, yeah, I can intuit what a starship is, but it's like, okay, can you intuit what scop is? Like, maybe from context clues, you'll figure out that scop is food, or particularly bad food. But again, it's kind of hard to recommend this book to a sci-fi fan, as opposed to a cyberpunk fan. And then in general, the book, I just don't think it's very well written. The translation is to blame for this, I will admit, but I ran into a couple of typos throughout the book. And it does this thing where every chapter is broken into paragraphs, and each paragraph is a different perspective, and it makes it incredibly hard to follow at times. Like, it doesn't introduce each character at the top of the section. It's not like, Zor, and then his paragraph. Like, it just jumps you into a new paragraph, and you're reading like 5 or 6 lines until you're like, they need to say a name, because I can't tell just from the pronouns alone who the hell is speaking right now. Like, obviously there's times where you're like, okay, this is the Ripper, this is the Corpo, whatever. You can kind of figure out from context. But there's other times where you're like, you don't realize who you're following until you've already gotten a page into the section, because they haven't given you any clues or haven't said flat out, who are we following? Which makes it incredibly frustrating at times to read. There are also characters that just, I forgot about. Like, there's a whole detective character called Liam, who is basically following the gang. The premise, I should say, of the book is that it's a makeshift gang who do this one job. They've been set up by Corpo to do it, and now they're kind of in too deep. You have one character who desperately needs to be repaired. She needs her cyber arms repaired. The Ripper can't afford to do it because he doesn't have the right gear. But if they do one more job, they can afford the gear she needs to get repaired. It's that level of snowballing. So they start with a small gig to try and make some money. They end up ruffling feathers. That leads to them having to do another gig to make more money. Things happen. But again, there's this detective called Liam who's following the story. And I swear to God, he appears, he figures out that they're involved, he eventually gets pulled from the case, and he just never comes back. He's never mentioned again. I finished the book, and I sat there and I was like, it was okay, and then I thought about it, and I was like, what the hell happened to him? They set it up like a typical cop procedural where it's like, oh, you got too close to the truth, and the higher-ups don't want the truth to come out, so we're taking you off the case and you're going into early retirement. But it's like, that usually leads to the follow-up where the cop then goes on their own and investigates the case, right? Like, that's the arc. Not, oh, this character's just gone now. So yeah, I think it does manage to pull itself back in the end. I think the ending is quite good. It's a very fitting ending for Night City. If you've never read the book, but you know Cyberpunk pretty well, again, it fits the themes of Night City as this horrible place where there are no good endings. Nobody gets a good ending in Night City. And I think the one thing that I can really praise about this book is that it gets the setting correct. It gets the feeling of Night City pretty well. I just don't think the characters, which again is a huge shame because 2077 has such strong characters, I don't think the characters in this book are going to have the lasting influence that, Johnny Silverhand or Jackie or V, like even V, the protagonist. There's no V in this book. There's no one of that kind of caliber. So that was my February and March reading diary. I tried to do these as quick as possible because I obviously had a lot to get through. But thank you for watching. I will try to do another one for April. I've already read a few books, or started a few books. So hopefully that one I will have enough to do just 1 month, not 2. But thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And again, my story graph is linked below, as well as my other channel if you want to check me out talking about video games. But yeah, I will see you all in the end of April / early May for another one.